Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And I will, let's see. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Going Back to School in the Midst of COVID-19. My name is Malika Reed Wilkins. I'm the Senior Director for the Center for Strategic Relations for the Atlanta Regional Commission. I will be your moderator today. We are coming to you live from all over the Atlanta region this afternoon as a part of an ongoing webinar series hosted by the Atlanta Regional Commission. Please visit our website at atlantaregional.org to view today's recording in a couple of days, as well as past webinars. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping rules. Let's see here. Okay, we've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee control panel for you. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You will have the opportunity to participate by typing your questions in the question pane of the control panel. You can send your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A session after the panelists have provided their brief overviews. You also see chat messages from us in that window, us meaning ARC staff, in that window. Feel free to add a chat if you'd like. All attendees have joined in listen-only mode, and so you will be on mute during today's meeting. A few other quick notes. If you click away to another application or browser during this session, look for the blue flower petal icon in the ribbon bar at the bottom or the side of your screen, or look in one of the open browser tabs. Today's webinar will be recorded through the GoToWebinar platform. And again, this recording will be made available to all meeting attendees via a follow-up email and will be posted to the ARC website. Okay, so let's get ready and let's get started. Today, we are excited to hear from our esteemed panelists who have all spent the majority of their adult life laser focused on providing the best educational experience to our nation's and region's children and adult learners. We know this topic of opening schools is ever-changing and evolving as I speak today, but we wanted to take a moment in time to hear from the experts and leaders from several educational institutions on their plans as we move forward. Before we start with our brief overviews, I'll go over a quick bio for each of our panelists, and then we will begin. Dr. Ken Zeff, let me put his picture up here. Dr. Ken Zeff is the Executive Director of Learn for Life, a nonprofit with the mission to harness the collective impact of metro area business, philanthropy, and nonprofit partners to support public schools and common education goals across the Atlanta region. Dr. Zeff is a former superintendent and chief strategy and innovation officer at Fulton County Schools. He served as chief operations officer for Green Dot Public Schools in Los Angeles. And he was also a White House fellow and served as a senior policy consultant to the United States Secretary of Education. And Dr. Zeff received his BA in economics from the University of Michigan, his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and his doctorate in education leadership from Georgia State University. Dr. Pamela Whitten was named Kennesaw State University's 5th president in 2018. Previously, Dr. Whitten served as Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost of the University of Georgia. Go Dogs, I had to say that. And prior to serving as Provost at UGA, Dr. Whitten was Director for Telemedicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Dr. Whitten has published 2 books and more than 100 peer-reviewed research articles and book chapters. She holds a PhD in Communication Studies from the University of Kansas, a Master's of Art in Communications from the University of Kentucky, and a Bachelor of Science in Management from Tulane University. Dr. Maurice Beasley. He currently serves as the Superintendent for Clayton County Public Schools. Prior to being elected Superintendent, he served as Clayton County Public Schools Chief School Improvement Officer. Dr. Beasley has over 20 years of dedicated service towards instructional practices and has held numerous leadership positions in public education. Dr. Beasley is also recognized for his impeccable ability to improve student achievement, strengthen community engagement, as well as develop and implement sustainable strategies for a school system. Dr. Beasley holds a Bachelor's of Mathematics from the University of Montevallo, a Master's of Science in Mathematics Education from Samford University, and an Educational Specialist and Doctorate degree in Education from Samford University. Now, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ken Zeff.
Dr. Zeff, is that the right screen for you? Okay. 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 We can see your screen now, although is the audio connected?
Sure. How's that?
Okay, that's perfect.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank
good.
you. Thank you, Dr. Wilkins and ARC for the opportunity to be with you today. You know, before we dive in, we should be clear, it's never been easy to educate students and prepare them to be productive citizens and to have successful careers. It's always been a monumental task. We ask so much from our teachers, from our parents, from our administrators to get students ready, to educate them, especially parents that live in resource-deprived homes, students that come from challenging backgrounds. That job just got harder. And we need to recognize that as we dive into this work, that we are continuing work that was already hard and making it and trying to push students forward. At Learn for Life, we're focused on bringing partners together from our districts, our higher ed institutions, bringing them together, learn from each other, trying to figure out what's working and how to take that to scale. And so I think in that context, we have learned a lot, we're hearing a lot. We want to share some of the background and get a level playing field for how to dive into this work and how to think about this. So let me start with a little bit of background of how we got into this challenging environment that we're in right now. It was March 13th, feels like a lifetime ago. It's about 4 months ago when the governor made the difficult decision to shut schools down. It's exactly 4 months ago yesterday, and we've been trying to collectively manage through that environment. So what does that environment create? So let's agree on some common facts as we dive into this conversation. So school, we lost 9 weeks of instruction. We found out that exposed some rifts and some digital inequity. Kids were reverted to a online instruction, online learning. They had limited access to devices, limited access to connectivity. In that ecosystem, We have parents who were struggling to keep their jobs together, keep their wages afloat. And we also exposed some basic needs around food insecurity. About 1 out of 4 students in Metro Atlanta suffer from food insecurity. And then to complicate this situation even more, our districts experienced 11% budget cut. So we know that had an impact on students. Learn for Life, with our friends at Redefined Ed, conducted a study, commissioned a study to understand what that loss of learning over those 9 weeks had on our students. And it was about a 3 to 4% loss in gains that our students had made. So more than 20,000 students in Metro Atlanta slipped below that proficiency line as a result of this loss of instruction, this inability to access high quality content. We had to backtrack in the progress that we were making. So what does that look like on a chart, just to help visualize this? So note, our teachers and parents and administrators have been making really solid gains in learning. This is 3rd grade literacy that we're looking at here. We see over time they had started to move kids forward, but then this loss of instruction, what we call the COVID slide, wiped out about 1.5 years of gains. So this progress that had been made had been reversed, not due to anything that our teachers, our hardworking teachers, our administrators, our district leaders had done. It was something that they experienced as a result of the pandemic. Now there is a lot of complexity that we're about to get into in this conversation, but let me try to simplify the conversation into two key competing challenges. How do we keep students safe? How do we keep students learning? If you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think it's an illustrative example of how complicated this situation has been. About 2 weeks ago, and many of you may have seen their release, this by a very respected institution. The goal was to have students in school. We know that students suffer immensely when they're not around their peers, when they're not in person. And so the guidance was, however we can get students in school, we should try to get students in school. Well, just the end of last week, they revised that guidance, and they instead drew special attention to this idea that students we should not reopen it in a way that is not safe for students, teachers, and staff. We must prioritize safety. And I think this gives you a sense of just how rapidly evolving the situation is. Had we given this talk just a couple weeks ago, we would have had a different lens on this work. But now as we see inspections spike around the country, and specifically here in Georgia, specifically here in Metro Atlanta, you see this general concern. I think we'll hear more about this from our district leaders. Now, there are hundreds of complications with reopening schools, and I just want to provide a brief overview of a few key ones, and our education leaders will be able to provide more insight from their specific corners of the universe. Obviously, a question around masks. Do students wear them? Are they required? What happens if a little child takes their mask off? What is the consequence for that child? How does a teacher entertain that? How do we manage through transportation, the additional cleaning schedules, extracurricular food service, and especially things like contingency plans? What happens when one student tests positive? What happens when a teacher tests positive? Does that classroom shut down? Does that building shut down? Does that district shut down? These are the questions that our institutions are grappling with. The state has offered some guidance, but it's more general, and each institution has its own set of unique requirements that needs to be managed. And you have to balance this with student learning. How do we manage digital equity? We know only about 80% of our students in Metro Atlanta were able to engage online with their teacher in the spring. How do we fix that? How do we turn distance learning from emergency learning into something more productive for students? We've lost a lot of instructional time. In the coming year, districts have already come out and said they're going to reduce from 180 days to 170 days. Where do we find that instructional time to get students caught up? We know there's been untold, both seen and unseen traumas that our students have been facing, and we know that traumas tend to stack upon each other and make it even harder for students to get re-engaged into the learning process. I mentioned earlier the economic woes that families are feeling, food insecurity, fear of getting sick. All that's landing on our students. Our students are feeling that. That is something that is going on in their ecosystem and needs to be addressed if we're going to get back to learning. Our special needs students are particularly at risk because many of them can't learn in remote situations. So how do we make sure that they have opportunities to get their learning back on track? And finally, assessing students. We need to understand where our students are in a world where Georgia milestones no longer exist. But we also have to be very sensitive to make sure we don't overdo testing and make sure that we're not returning to a time when teachers felt burdened and handcuffed by the test. We need formative assessments that are quick, that tell teachers exactly where their students are so they can design lessons that meet those students' needs. And my last summary, just a few key themes that we've heard from our district and higher ed partners. No one size solution fits all. You have some families that have two parents at home that can navigate digital learning successfully, and then you have some single parent homes that are struggling to take care of their household and take care of their student. How does that parent find time to manage all the challenges of online learning? As data changes, so do plans. We all want the answer right away, and we want it to be firm. As you'll hear from our district leaders, this is a rapidly evolving situation, and plans have to change as facts change. Patience is required. Assume good intent. Undue pressure from outside entities that politicize these situations don't help. It raises the pressure on our district and higher ed leaders to make tough decisions. Recognize that these folks have courage and they're working to it to the best of their ability. And the last point I'll leave folks with is this will not be cheap. We are, I've heard estimates of several $100,000s per school building to get it to take care of protective equipment, take care of cleaning, additional monitoring. This is all in the swirl of this budget crisis that we're suffering from. How do we prioritize education? Because we know that K-12 is the de facto childcare provider in our state. How do we make sure that we're prioritizing that in a time when budget priorities are complicated? And so I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. You have the benefit of two terrific leaders from two members of our leadership council, Dr. Beasley and Dr. Witten, that can provide some insight from their perspective as they manage their institutions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zeff, and I will turn it over to Dr. Witten. Just one second. All righty. Dr. Witten.
Well, good afternoon from Kennesaw. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I thought maybe I would just speak for maybe 4 or 5 minutes to kind of set the stage about kind of the basics about where we are. And I am speaking, of course, specifically to Kennesaw State, but I suspect if you were to hear from the president of other universities in the area, you would hear very similar types of comments that are in play. So first of all, many of you, of course, are from this area. You're from Georgia. You know, you're familiar with KSU, and you're familiar with, you know, frankly, a kind of a stunning meteoric history, right? I mean, we're up to 38,000 students now at the university. Last year, we had a 30% increase in our freshman class alone. 80% of our incoming freshmen have the Hope Scholarship. We were just designated an R2 institution. So nationally, that means we're now a research institution. And so the level of opportunity and things that we produce, of course, are more complicated, but wonderful. And all that is to say that it's, you know, it's an exciting place to be. And it's certainly a university, you know, that's on an upward trajectory. And so we, like everyone, remember spring and certainly remember March 13th very well as the date that everything changed on campus. And we were at that point about 60% of the way done with the spring semester. And so, you know, it wasn't easy and it wasn't always perfect, but it was pretty impressive how every student had the opportunity to finish out and earn all their credits for the spring semester. And we're actually in school now. So we are in the summer portion. We've got about another week left of summer school. We have the highest enrollment we've ever had in summer. Of course, it's fully remote. We were up 14% this summer over last summer and have 20,000 students alone just this summer taking courses. And we're very pleased about that because we know when students take courses in the summer, they graduate faster. And of course, our agenda is to make sure that all of our students graduate in a timely way from KSU. So meanwhile, of course, as that is going on, we've pivoted and are working toward the fall 2020 semester for our university. And so we announced recently that, of course, our intent is to be back on campus in person. That will not look like it always has before every fall. There will be things that are different, some that we can predict, some that we'll see. We set our schedule to begin as we normally would on August 17th and to go through Thanksgiving. But once everyone goes home for Thanksgiving break, then we'll have 1 week of finishing out courses online, and then all final exams and papers will be the following week and will be done virtually as well. So once Thanksgiving is done, then we won't necessarily have students that need to be on campus for the most part for reasons of finishing their degrees. Meanwhile, I can't even begin to portray or exaggerate to you the level of work that has been ongoing to prepare us to be able to come back in the fall semester. So in April, I actually created a presidential task force that's comprised of 7 teams that include academics, campus operations, enrollment, fiscal implications, information technology, research, and the student experience. And there is extensive work going on led by this task force that it literally are including hundreds and hundreds of people across campus in various areas to plan. And it's incredibly complex. I would not be able to do it justice in any way, shape, or form, but just to give you a couple of examples or highlights. On the academic side, for example, we are working through the protocols for in-person instruction. And I should tell you, this is on a class-by-class basis. Nobody will be the same. So for example, one instructor might decide that all the lectures are going to be online, and they're going to bring the students in. Let's say they meet Tuesday and Thursday. Half will come in Tuesday for in-person activities and discussion, and then half would come into the Thursday class to facilitate social distancing. Or for example, where we have large classes, where we're blowing open spaces. And so for example, we have a gym on our Marietta campus that will not be a gym in the fall semester, but it gives us a huge space in which to have a class with a lot of students and really spread them out, as well. So there are spaces all over campus that we are expanding to make sure that we can do this in a safe and healthy way. Safety protocol, of course, which is a very important issue. There's a great deal of work that's been going on. Certainly cleaning, and it's impressive the cleaning protocol that is in place across our institution now and to be carried forward in the fall. You might have read that we will be wearing masks on our campus, particularly in places where students are in classes or other places where they're potentially somewhat close together, still socially distanced. We've opened up so much outside space and furniture and places to hang out to try to alleviate some of the congested spaces in between classes, the Chick-fil-A, the Starbucks, the other places like that are on our campus. We're going to have a COVID testing on both of our campuses that will be available to all students, but we also have contracted with Wellstar, so we'll be having testing available every day on both campuses for our faculty and staff as well. We've also are working with Wellstar and have created a help hotline so that students and faculty and staff aren't calling us that aren't necessarily health experts, but have a place to call 24 hours a day to ask any health-related, specifically COVID-related question and get guidance as well. So that's just a tease, if you will, of some of what's actually going on. The work continues. I will tell you, we have 33 days to go, I believe, until we actually start back in some capacity in August. We're very grateful. We have a university system that's working diligently, a chancellor deeply committed, regents that are working with us around the clock, Governor, General Assembly, very, very committed to helping us figure out how to do this right. And so, so all I can say is that, to add to Ken's comments, things change and our knowledge changes on a daily basis, but we feel comfortable that we have the rigor and the infrastructure in place to move forward and to adjust as necessary as we learn new things. So on that note, let me stop with the university perspective, and we can transition to the K-12 perspective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitten. Thank you. Now we will go to Dr. Beasley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. I am thankful for the opportunity to be with the ARC, Dr. Wilkins, of course, Dr. Whitten, and Ken Zeff, who we work closely with throughout the year. I'll just share with you the K-12 space. We've been working diligently, and I'll just speak for all the superintendents, in particular those of us in the metro area, but we've been working diligently to figure it all out, everybody. It's been challenging. You know, Ken mentioned instructional time, equity, and distance learning, and managing trauma, special ed, and budgets, and safety. And we're trying to balance all of those things and produce the best reopening plans that we can produce given the situation as it is. So in Clayton County, we developed roughly 4 options: a face-to-face option for a low-risk virus situation, a moderate risk, a blended option, face-to-face and virtual, and then a full virtual option. And then for the face-to-face and the blended option, we were going to run concurrently a virtual learning academy. Well, after surveying our parents, our community, our employees, etc., and based upon the data, while we were leaning toward the blended model, our board took action based on my recommendation on last night to implement the virtual option to reopen schools. So we will be opening schools. They moved this start date back for students 1 week on August 10th, and we'll be opening using the full virtual learning option. We'll provide nutrition services for our students as we did in the spring. We're working to purchase new devices, Chromebooks, for 38,000 students, but we're going to use 30,000 old devices to get us started, and hopefully the new devices will get here from the distributors in a timely manner. Our goal is to prioritize the families that did not have devices, asking all the other families or families with devices to continue to use their devices until we get to the day that everyone has been issued their new Chromebook. We're counting on our partners, and they've stepped up to the plate, and we're appreciative to help us with ensuring that not only do we provide the devices, but if families need Wi-Fi, we're also providing hotspots to those families that inform us that they need Wi-Fi. Staff development is important, so our teachers have been all summer and will continue. With the additional week of pre-planning, they will continue to prepare for virtual learning and maximizing that environment, ensuring rigor, and also addressing social emotional topics throughout the school day, early in the morning as students log in and throughout the school day. We're also working to ensure that our students with special needs are getting the services that they deserve and that the law requires that we provide. It looks a little different in a virtual environment, but we've learned a few things from this past spring, and we're going to make a point to do a better job at ensuring that they get the services that they provide. I'd like to share that one of the challenges that we know families will have will be childcare with this virtual option. Our goal is to pivot back to a face-to-face as soon as the data allows us to do so. We have committed to reassess in 9 weeks or less, or every 9 weeks or less. But we're counting on the public to help us get some data that will allow us to really strongly consider and recommend to our Board of Education a return to face-to-face. That's where we are. Clayton County is going to send to all of our parents a virtual learning parent guide that will have the various scheduling options or models for each level, elementary, middle, and high school, information about school nutrition, where they can get meals, athletics, extracurricular activities, etc. And we're just trying to take full advantage of our resources to ensure that our kids have the best instructional experience that we can provide given the circumstances. We're asking our faith-based community to step up to the plate to assist families with childcare, and we're going to try to help in whatever way that we can to do just that. We have adopted a budget. It's been impacted by COVID-19, clearly. We've had an increase in expenditures, but we also appreciated the CARES Act funds, which helped us with the devices and will help offset expenses, but we still had to plan for a decrease in revenue, as many of you well know, based upon the state's budget, which decreased about 11%. But that's where we are in Clayton County. We're glad to be here and to share as we prepare what we believe will be a great school year. We're going to take this the situation is, as we like to say, some lemons and make some lemonade out of it. And our community has been very supportive and positive in light of the situation that we did not cause, but we're certainly having to deal with.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beasley. We want to make sure we can see you on your webcam, so we will work to get that taken care of, but we certainly heard you, and that is of most importance. And so thank you all for your opening remarks here, and I will share mine as well. And so let's go ahead and dive into some questions that we have, and as they begin to trickle in from our audience, I'll just start off with saying, wow. You all have done an amazing job in preparing, of course, for today, but not just for today, preparing all year long for what we will encounter in terms of schools opening this fall. I'll start with you, Dr. Zeff, in terms of the work that Learn for Life has done in assessing learning loss. Or potential learning loss for, of course, the K through 12 arena. But I'll ask after Dr. Zeff, any one of you to talk about how you are handling and addressing any learning loss or potential learning loss, whether it is K through 12 or adult learners in your respective institutions.
Thanks, Dr. Wilkins. Look, it's learning loss is devastating. Our teachers had been making so much progress, and to see this backslide happen, as Dr. Beasley said, due to no fault of their own, by this unprecedented event, is really dispiriting. What we wanted to look at was actual Atlanta data, and we looked at the summer loss, and then we looked at what had happened in other natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Harvey. And what we found was that, not surprisingly to anybody on this call, disproportionately, communities of color, low-income communities are disproportionately affected by this lack of access to technology, lack of access to in-person instruction. And so what you see is and unfortunately Georgia Milestones wasn't administered, so we had to do we had an outside group do this assessment. But to something like 28,000 students are no longer proficient in math than they were the year before. That is devastating. And so unfortunately, I'm not sure we're at the bottom just yet, because as we continue to dive into, I'm not sure if we're we're likely at the end of the beginning, but I'm not sure we're in the middle or even towards the end. And so what the heroic work that Dr. Beasley and Dr. Witten described of really understanding where students are so we can make sure we get the right resource at the right time, that's really the work ahead of us. The state will likely cancel Georgia Milestones again next year. So we really are faced with this challenge of understanding where students are. And so I would just, all the parents out there, when you get back to school, your child, virtual or otherwise, your administrators and teachers are going to try to understand where your student is so they can diagnose them and then make sure they get the right treatment for them and get the right resources for them. And so we just want to be supportive of that, because without that assessment to help undo some of this work, some of this damage that's happened, we won't have the right path forward.
Dr. Wilkins, I'll just add that the learning loss is a priority, a major focus for us. We're prioritizing our grade level content. We recognize that we've got to be very strategic about what content we teach, look at prerequisite skills. Teachers have been working on that all summer to basically determine what needs to be taught in the new school year. We have decided to abandon some diagnostic assessments, but there are others that we will be using because we know that diagnosis is critical to the learning process, but we're focused on accelerating. So our goal is to ensure that all kids are getting grade level content and higher with the support that they need. And we have various strategies that we'll be using in our toolbox. that all teachers are preparing to use. So we're going to do our best to address the learning loss issue.
So from the perspective of higher ed, it's a little different. So, part of what we, of course, learned very quickly is that there are certain areas or subjects that were deeply challenged to find ways to successfully educate students or help them make progress toward a degree. And some of them should be obvious, right? I mean, our nursing students need clinical skill training, and some of it certainly can be simulation, but we know there's a cutoff point. Our education students, they need to be in the classroom for that part of their experience as well. But we also saw some pretty amazing things. I didn't know how a dance professor was going to teach a dance class this way, and they pulled it off. It was pretty impressive. Or, our physics faculty are incredibly creative, and they figured out how you can do a full physics lab, a full course, the whole thing, the whole semester online. So it's been amazing what people have come up with. And then we've also just learned some lessons about how we can use this technology more effectively in the future to be even better at what we do. And so I'll give two quick examples. One is from an econ professor. He teaches one of the very large intro level econ classes. And of course, when he was teaching fully online, he was recording himself. And he said what he found was that students' grades went up in their assignments because what they did was they would go watch the lecture again. And then from that, better understand the directions, or it helped them study better for things as well. So he said from now on, even if it's in person, he's going to record his lectures and put them online because it helps students perform better. A second example is we found that during this time, students were having to enroll, right, for summer and for next fall. And we found that they were so much better at keeping their advising appointments that they had scheduled if they did it this way rather than actually having to come in person. And so we now know, that's probably a good tool to use in the future to just have higher success with students showing up for a scheduled appointment for things like advising as well. So we're finding things on both sides of the continuum.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you, the questions are coming in, so I don't have to give any more starter questions. So let me see. If you give me a second, I'm going to start looking at these questions specifically. Okay, I will start with Dr. Whitten. Dr. Whitten, will student cost increase, decrease, change due to any COVID preparation here that you can foresee?
Yes, there will be no increase, certainly no increase at all to students. And so it will be regular tuition and then of course, if they do things like live in a dormitory, residence hall, or eat on campus dining, they would pay those fees as they normally would, or if they don't, they wouldn't pay those fees. So there'll be no increase in cost.
I think this is for both Dr. Beasley and Whitten. What can parents be doing now to support students really at all levels, academically, emotionally, as they prepare for this ensuing school year? And Dr. Zeff, you can certainly chime in as well, but really it's for all three of them. What can parents and people that support the students be doing right now?
I'll just share. I'll start out. I'll just share the one thing I encourage parents to do is to just help children to remain calm and to just have conversations that school will occur. It just may be a little different right now. And then find opportunities to that you can to engage them with their peers, engage them in extracurricular activities. It may, we have to, of course, be safe and follow guidelines for social distancing, but kids can still have fun, and kids can still be kids, and kids can still go outside and play in the yard and go to parks and ride bikes. And so I don't want parents to feel like, oh, we've lost so much instructionally, then we OD on taking away the opportunity for kids just to be kids, which to me is a very important aspect of growing up in a healthy, socially emotional manner. So I need parents to, sometimes we can go from 0 to 10 as parents, and we just need parents to kind of be level-headed and recognize, yes, we want to get learning loss. We want to address that. We want kids to learn. But at the end of the day, we want kids to be healthy. We want them to feel safe. We want them to be fine. We want them to be kids. We want them to grow in a manner that adds value to their lives. So I just need everybody to just stop stressing, in the situation and allow kids to be kids. And we're going to work out all those other details relative to school and devices and laptops and Chromebooks. We're going to work all those details out, but we don't need our kids so stressed that even once we start virtual learning, that it's very difficult for them to even participate or focus on the learning process. So I would just say, just everybody just calm down and let's see if we can have a degree of normalcy in the lives of our children.
And of course, in our case, we're really dealing with young adults. So it's some different challenges, although certainly their worlds are upside down as well. For parents, I would suggest for many of our parents that they encourage their student to reach out as necessary because, frankly, I'm personally worried about financial challenges a lot of our students and their families will face. And so as students are facing these challenges or feeling stressed about it, to reach out individually to the financial aid office at the university and talk through challenges and see if we can't help find solutions to make sure students are able to be successful in school. I will tell you on a lighter note, of course, we hear from many students that are very anxious to get out of their parents' homes and come back to school and live with people that are more in their age range. What many of the students don't realize is we also hear from their parents that are very anxious for their students to leave their house and come back to school as well.
And I would just add that think about what the pandemic does. It isolates us, right? It forces us into our homes. It forces us underground. I think we need to fight against that. And so if your parents at K-12, I would say stay informed. This is a rapidly evolving situation. I know Dr. Beasley does Facebook Lives quite regularly. He's very active on social media. Whatever district you're watching from, your district is active on social media. You can connect with your principal. You have to stay engaged because the situations are changing, and so we have to fight against that isolation. And in the post-secondary world, we're seeing the same thing. This idea of students needing support, especially first-generation students that don't have a lot of that support handy, you have to reach out to your institution. You have to push against. You can't just show up and get that social capital that you may get from being in line with somebody. And whenever you see a line, maybe you should be in that line. All of that interaction that we normally thrive on. We have to be more intentional about it, and so for all of us, we have to lean into this crisis and resist the gravity that's pulling us apart.
Thank you. And you all just touched on something, and it happens to be a burning question here in terms of this pandemic and how it's ever changing in our state, in our region. And so I'll pose the question to Dr. Whitten and Dr. Beasley, as well as you, Dr. Zeff. What protocols are in place if we have to sort of quote unquote shut down again? If there is any call from some of our elected officials higher up, et cetera, or if we find that it's out of control, hopefully that won't be the case, but if there is any such scenario, what do you have in place to quickly change course if something like that were to happen?
Well, from the university perspective, we did that. So, when March 13th happened, we had actually started to plan in January because we watched, frankly, what was happening in China and then in Italy. And, we had international students or students abroad that were affected. So, frankly, we were on it pretty early. And so when the decision was made the 13th, we didn't have to take a 2-week hiatus at our university. We were able to start again the following Wednesday, which ended up being quite a blessing in terms of keeping the continuity of education for our students. But it was because of much of the planning. Now, if that were to happen again, of course, we have ramped up that planning. And so we have done a lot of work over the summer with professional development for our faculty so that they are better versed, frankly, in remote instruction, and hopefully their skill set is up. We've done a lot of work, continued work with IT infrastructure, with buying devices that will be available for faculty and students as necessary, and then alternate places for those that have a challenge accessing broadband. So, again, it's not ideal and it wouldn't be perfect, but we would be able to switch over in 24 hours if we needed.
Thank you.
I'll just share from a K-12 perspective. Similarly, we were able to pivot very quickly to the virtual learning environment. However, the challenge many of us, I know Clayton had, was all kids did not have devices, and many kids who may have had devices, sometimes the families did not have the internet or wireless. So addressing that has been critical to our efforts. So we have what we believe is a flexible enough plan to go from virtual to a blended model to face-to-face based upon the data. I know here in Clayton, as I shared earlier, we're getting devices, we're issuing the ones that we do have. Our goal is to get one in the hands of every student. We're ordering devices when clearly the majority of districts are possibly ordering devices. So that is an area that we'll continue to monitor, that we'll continue to, I believe, make progress in until every kid gets a device, every family has Wi-Fi. But I do think that we have plans, we have guidelines in place, we have a process, safety guidelines for returning in a blended or face-to-face environment. It's just a matter of it being safe to do so. We're trying to balance all of the concerns with the parents have concerns. I know we did a survey and about 70% of our parents were not comfortable with sending their children back to school, even with safety guidelines, recognizing that the COVID has hit this community pretty hard, or at least it's one of the communities that has been hit pretty hard. So we believe we have flexible enough plans, we're prepared. Of course, we've got to manage the resources well because we don't have an endless pot of money. So we appreciate the CARES Act. I do believe we need more federal funds to assist with this situation if it continues to drag out. But we believe that we'll be able to navigate it, and the sooner we can get our kids back to school face to face, I believe the better it will be for all families.
And I would just add very briefly that the close down is actually not as hard, I think you've heard from both of these leaders, as the something in between. The hybrid models, in the beginning of this, a lot of conversation was had around hybrid models. A lot of districts in metro area we're talking about A/B days and talking about different approaches. Those get very complicated very quick. And so you ended up, and now I predict in the next couple of weeks, there's still a few that we are hoping for in-person instruction. It's if you look across the country, it's just not happening in large districts that you're seeing. Los Angeles, San Diego, one after another districts starting to move to full-time virtual. Virtual is easier to manage. I think we all desperately, like Dr. Beasley said, we all desperately want our students to be in person, but I think remotely and virtual is probably easier for districts to manage than blended, just because we haven't done anything like that before.
Switching gears, we've been talking about the students and what you all have in place for learning and plans you have in place to mitigate through that learning loss. I want to focus just a little bit on the employees and the staff. And we have a couple of questions here about how the institutions that you all govern and manage, how will you assist staff that even they also have school-age children, and sort of navigate through whether you're starting off all virtual, whether you're starting off going into a campus environment with the safety protocols. What has anything been done for the staff or any accommodations or anything?
If I may, I'll just start. We're working with our principals to acknowledge that we have many teachers who have children. Their school systems, whether they're enrolled in Clayton or somewhere else, may be in a different situation. Childcare may be an issue. So we're just trying to balance by requiring a degree of flexibility to ensure that the work gets done, the instruction occurs. But we're trying to be flexible. We have shared with everyone the staff leave, the laws that govern leave related to COVID-19, and we encourage people to take full advantage of the remedy that the law allows. But we're being very mindful and just trying to be responsive, considerate, flexible as we provide instruction to students, but we also recognize that our employees, teachers, they're also dealing with life and family situations and COVID-19, et cetera. So no one particular thing, just several strategies to ensure that we are responsive, that we have a degree of flexibility, and that we acknowledge that everyone is being impacted by this to some degree.
You know, I would just say I think that's the $64,000 question issue, right? I mean, if we learned anything, we learned that the challenge for parents with children at home, whether they're school age or not, brought many industries to their knees. You know, as folks were challenged to try to be able to do the important work with their children, as well as the important work for their job as well. And we know there's not going to be easy answers for that. And to Dr. Beasley's point, it's about working with people. It's about being flexible. You know, we're exploring a different type of flex schedule, and maybe working, you know, offering different days of the week you would normally be able to work. And, you know, we have to figure out how to make it work, because my children are grown. I have 2 grandchildren, 4 and 2, and I watched my own daughter and her husband, who are working tremendously hard during this time, frankly, go a little crazy. I mean, it's just really difficult. So we've got to be really thoughtful, I think, for those parents that are home doing the important work of raising their children and educating our young adults at universities as well.
And I would just add that empathy that both of these leaders have modeled, I think, is right on. You know, heart breaks for teachers, especially so many that are in some of these high risk categories. They came into this profession because they love kids. And now they're prevented from doing that. No easy answers, but listening and empathizing is important. You know, the one point I just want to make sure that is out there, because I don't think there's been quite enough talk about it in the popular press, is the childcare situation. K-12 and to some, you know, and even into higher ed, is the de facto childcare provider in this country. So how are we going to make sure that our kids have somewhere to be watched to get this economy going? If we want to put our foot on the gas and get the economy going, we have to deal with that issue. It's not going to be cheap. It may require CARES Act funding. It may require some creativity, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any road of getting back to business without answering that fundamental question of who's going to watch 1.8 million children in the state of Georgia and 600,000 in Metro Atlanta.
I'll ask another question, and then I'll ask you all to sort of give some final words. This is really good, and they're coming in. I'll start with you, Dr. Beasley, and certainly I believe Dr. Whitten has already addressed this in terms of professional development you've been doing all summer long for your educators. But Dr. Beasley, a question is also, how are you preparing your educators for virtual learning, or how have you, or what do you plan to do, et cetera, in that regard? And then you can certainly follow up, Dr. Whitten, with what you're seeing across the country or right here in Georgia. But I'll start with you, Dr. Beasley.
Well, that's a great question. I'll tell you, we had started prior to the pandemic using Google Classroom for Classroom about 2 years. And so many of our educators were getting familiar, comfortable with the platform. Now it's not an option, it's a requirement. And so everyone has been getting familiar. But at the same time, prior to the pandemic, we were also addressing how do we ensure that instruction is engaging, that it's at the appropriate level, et cetera. And so it's just a matter of merging the best practices for a virtual learning experience, depending on the age of the child, the needs of the child, and that of what happens to ensure that students are learning at high levels. Also, at the same time, addressing the social emotional aspect of it. And so our teachers have been participating in training in those areas this entire summer, and they'll continue during pre-planning and even after we start virtual learning on August 10th. So that's just an area that we recognize that we started in. We've had to pivot a little bit because virtual learning is no longer an option for just the few who wanted to do it. It's for everyone now. And so just trying to ensure that we normalize the best practices and that every teacher in every classroom has a degree of quality, if you will, relative to what that instruction looks like. Being able to identify and respond to social emotional issues or trauma in a virtual environment, and then helping our students develop some skills to be self-aware, to manage themselves, and to be responsible in their decision making. And so all of that has been our work, again, prior to the pandemic, but surely during this pandemic and this summer as we prepare for the new school year.
Thank you. Well, I will start with either one of you who would like to give some final words. Certainly this isn't the final word in your profession, but on this webinar, we are about 5 minutes away from our hour mark, and we want to be cognizant of time. And so, Dr. Zeff, if you want to start with some final words here, and we will move to Dr. Whitten and then Dr. Beasley.
Well, it's been great to be with everyone today. I think folks are walking away with a sense of the complexity that it's really the tip of the iceberg, and like any iceberg, all the real challenges are underneath the waterline as we really start to operationalize some of these challenges. There's 3 things that come to mind as for parents and adults who are engaged in one way or another, and everyone really touches the public education system. First is be patient. This is, as you hear, people are working hard. People have been working hard all summer trying to develop professional development, trying to develop assessments, trying to develop curriculum, trying to transition to an online ecosystem. So be patient with your teachers, with your administrators. Be informed. It is our responsibility to understand. People oftentimes they say they're not communicating enough, but really oftentimes they're saying they just want to know. It's going to take some work to sort through, especially in a rapidly changing situation, all of the information to make sure you're getting the up-to-date information. I know that all districts and our higher ed partners are providing information, so we have to consume it. And finally, be engaged. This is the time to really partner with your students, partner with your higher ed student or K-12 student, and really understand what they're going through. I think Dr. Beasley said it right. There's a lot of trauma and a lot of drama that are falling into the laps of our students. They need support. They don't have that support at school as much anymore because they're not in person. They don't have the support as much from their peers. They're going to need it from home. So be engaged with your student, and of course with your legislators, because as both of my colleagues have said, this isn't going to be cheap, and so we're going to need to sort through what our financial priorities are to navigate to get through to the other side of this crisis.
I'll just close, by acknowledging, and I think it's important that we all do that. I don't know if any of you also are interested in astronomy and physics, but if you are, the last 6 months or so, it's been amazing how much we've learned that has shown us how much we don't know in terms of universe and galaxies, et cetera. And that's where we are. There is so much that we don't know, and that we learn on a continuing basis. But having said that, I would ask or encourage everyone to actually be optimistic about at least what's going to happen at the higher ed level this coming year. There are so many people that have never worked harder in their lives, and I mean they're up at 5 in the morning and they're still, we're still on at 10 or 11 at night constantly. And you would be inspired by the people that are deeply committed to figuring out how we make this a good experience for our students. And we certainly want them to learn the material to be trained appropriately for whatever they're studying. But we also acknowledge that you go to college once, right? And hopefully it's the only 4 years, sometimes it's 5 or 6, but it's the only time you have to be a college student. And we don't want anyone to lose this semester or this year, by just saying, well, it's going to be what it is, and aren't you lucky you went to school? So we're all in to make it the best possible experience we can for students. And I think that many, if they come into it with the right approach and the right attitude, are going to have a good college year.
Thank you. Dr. Beasley?
Well, I'll just share, ditto to what everyone else has already shared, but I think a sense of community is very important, whether it be family members coming together, communities, associations, neighborhoods coming together. I think a sense of community is very important, and helping one another through the pandemic, whether it be helping families get groceries, childcare, whatever it might be. I think this is the time to be neighborly. I think being flexible is important for families, realizing that sometimes we stress out about things that we have no control over. And I think we need to work to not stress out about things that we can't control, and just be flexible and do the things that we can do. And lastly, as Dr. Witten said, I think we should be hopeful, optimistic, that we can get this thing turned around through some responsible actions, working together, being less political and being more responsible. I think we can get this thing turned around. And so I just want to encourage everyone to build that sense of community, remain flexible, and let's all be hopeful and optimistic that this thing will turn around sooner than later, and we'll be a better society because of it, if we make the right decisions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. I mean, it just warms my heart. I'm feeling so hopeful and excited right now. You just don't know how much we appreciate the three of you joining us today, and the hundreds of people that have joined us today as well. I just want to end by saying we do have another ARC webinar coming up next Tuesday, what we know or think we know about the economic impact of COVID-19, and all of you have touched on it today at one point or another. And so again, thank you all so very much. And again, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on our ARC website within 48 hours. And also within 48 hours, the attendees will receive the link to the recorded webinar. Again, thank you so much, all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.